After my son's death, my daughter-in-law threw me out. During the will reading, she sneered, "You won't get a cent from your son's estate, I promise you." The lawyer smiled and said, "Actually, there's one more item left." When he read it aloud, my daughter-in-law fainted. Have you ever faced a betrayal so cruel, so calculated, it felt like a punch to the gut on the worst day of your life? Imagine burying your only son, the boy you raised, the man you loved more than life itself. And then, just hours later, his own wife, the woman who swore to love him forever, looks you in the eye, mocks you, and kicks you out of your home. She thought she'd won, that she'd taken everything. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that my brilliant boy had one final, shocking twist waiting for her, a twist that made her faint right there in the lawyer's office. You won't believe what was written in that will. Dennis was so difficult to care for these last months. The words hit me like a blast of ice-cold water, shocking me out of my grief. I stood frozen beside my son's casket, the funeral program trembling violently in my hands. Vera, my daughter-in-law, my son's wife, was scrolling through her phone, utterly detached, as if she hadn't just spoken about my dead son like a burden she'd finally shed. Vera, my voice cracked, raw with disbelief, barely audible through the cold March air. We just buried my son. Show some respect for the dead. She looked up from her screen, irritation flashing across her perfectly made-up face. The wind whipped through the cemetery, scattering the white lilies Martha had placed on nearby graves. Other mourners, walking toward their cars, had stopped. Their conversations died. They were listening now. Your son? Vera's laugh was sharp, brittle, cutting through the silence. He was my husband, Horace. And now, everything is mine. The funeral program tore slightly in my grip. My engineering mind, always so precise, struggled to process the sheer audacity, the chilling indifference of what I was hearing. This woman had stood beside Dennis for 7 years. She'd promised to love him in sickness and in health. Yet here she was, 30 minutes after we'd lowered him into the ground, talking about possession and ownership. "What's wrong with you?" I whispered, my voice carrying further than intended in the stark quiet. "At least pretend you're sad." Tom Riley, Dennis's business partner, had stopped walking. He stood 20 feet away, holding his wife's arm, both of them staring at us with undisguised shock. Martha Ellis, a longtime family friend, was moving closer, her face pale with concern. Vera slipped her phone into her designer purse, her movements deliberate. "Sad, Horace? I've been planning my new life for months." Dennis knew this marriage was over. We both did. "That's not true." The words came out strangled. "He loved you." Even when the cancer, she adjusted her expensive black coat, the one Dennis had bought her last Christmas. "It gave me time to think. To plan. Now I can finally live again." Martha reached us just as Vera turned toward the parking area. "Vera, please. This isn't the time or place." "Actually, Martha, this is exactly the time." Vera's heels clicked against the concrete pathway, sharp and unforgiving. "I've spent 18 months playing the devoted wife. I'm done performing." The remaining guests had gathered in small clusters, whispering amongst themselves, their horrified murmurs carried on the wind. Mrs. Henderson from the church slowly shook her head. The 3 men from Dennis's engineering team looked deeply uncomfortable, shuffling their feet, avoiding eye contact. I watched Vera walk away, her stride confident and purposeful, leaving me stunned. She hadn't shed a single tear during the service. Not one. While I'd barely held myself together reading the eulogy, she'd sat in the front pew, checking her watch and tapping her manicured nails against the wooden bench. "Horace." Martha's hand touched my shoulder, a warm anchor in the freezing reality. "Are you all right?" I couldn't answer. My throat felt raw, scraped clean by disbelief and a sickening, growing anger. The woman Dennis had trusted with his life, his business, his love, she'd been counting the days until his death, planning her escape while he fought for every breath. The wind picked up again, rattling the bare branches overhead. Vera reached her silver Mercedes, the one Dennis had surprised her with for their 5th anniversary. She didn't look back, not once. Standing there beside my son's grave, I wondered what Dennis would think if he could see her now. Would he be heartbroken, angry? Or had he suspected what I was only beginning to understand? The expensive car pulled away, disappearing around the cemetery's curved road. I was alone now, except for Martha, who waited patiently beside me, and the groundskeepers in the distance, preparing to fill the grave. My hands were still shaking as I looked down at Dennis's photograph in the torn program. His smile looked back at me, confident and warm, the way he'd always been, even during those final weeks, making mysterious phone calls to Leonard Baxter and insisting everything would be taken care of. Looking at Dennis's face in that photograph, I felt something break open inside my chest. Not just grief this time, but something deeper. Pride mixed with a desperate longing for just one more conversation with my brilliant boy. The wind scattered more flower petals across the fresh grave dirt. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. Dennis, at 8 years old, standing in our garage workshop with model airplane glue on his fingers and fierce determination in his dark eyes. He'd insisted on painting his planes purple and gold instead of the realistic silver and green the instruction manual suggested. "Dad, why do planes need to be silver?" he'd asked, holding up his bright purple fighter jet. "I want to make mine different." Even then, he'd refused to follow conventional rules. While other kids built their models exactly as directed, Dennis experimented. He'd modify wing angles, adjust landing gear, create his own color schemes. Half his planes crashed during test flights, but the ones that flew, those were spectacular. I opened my eyes and looked at the photograph again. That same stubborn creativity had made him millions. I remembered a Northwestern University family dinner in 2016, Dennis explaining his latest business idea, gesturing excitedly with his fork. His mother had died the year before, and these Sunday dinners had become sacred to both of us. "I have an idea for an app that could help people organize their schedules better," he'd said, eyes bright with possibility. "But not just calendars, Dad. Something that learns your patterns, predicts what you need, helps you make better decisions about your time." I'd worried he was dreaming too big. "Son, there are already scheduling apps, lots of them. But none that think like humans do," he'd countered, pulling out his phone, sketching wireframes on napkins. What if technology could actually make our lives simpler instead of more complicated? That app became TimeSync. Within 2 years, he'd sold it for $12 million. But the memory that cut deepest was from just 3 years ago. Dennis had driven to my house in Evanston, arriving unannounced on a Tuesday evening with champagne and news that would change everything. "Dad, I'll take care of you when you retire. You've worked hard enough." He'd pulled out his phone, showing me TechFlow Solutions' latest valuation report. $70 million. "Dad, can you believe it?" I couldn't believe it. My son, who'd once built purple airplanes in my garage, had created something worth more money than I'd earned in my entire career as a civil engineer. "Dennis, that's incredible. But I don't need, yes, you do." His voice had been firm but gentle. "You've taken care of me my whole life. Let me return the favor. I'm buying you that workshop you've always wanted, the one with proper ventilation and all the tools you've been dreaming about." That workshop sat in my backyard now, barely used since his diagnosis. I'd been too busy taking care of him to build anything. Martha cleared her throat softly. "Horace, it's getting cold. Maybe we should." I shook my head. I wasn't ready to leave him yet. Not when these memories were all I had left of his voice, his laugh, his absolute certainty that everything would work out fine. Dennis had always been a planner. Even as a child, he'd mapped out his days, his projects, his dreams with an engineering precision that matched my own. He'd inherited that from me, the need to understand how things worked, to fix problems before they became disasters. But there was one problem he couldn't fix. one timeline he couldn't control. The memory I'd been avoiding all day pushed its way forward. Dennis's phone call 18 months ago, his voice steady despite the news that would destroy everything we'd planned. "Dad, I have cancer, but I'm going to fight this." Standing there in the cemetery wind, I realized I needed to remember that fight, too. Not just the good times, but the battle that had shown me who my son really was, and who his wife really was. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in September 2023. I was rebuilding my neighbor's fence when Dennis called, his voice unusually formal. "Dad, I have cancer, but I'm going to fight this. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. The words hit like sledgehammer blows. Aggressive. Advanced. Poor prognosis. I dropped my tools and drove straight to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where Dennis was meeting with his oncology team. He looked smaller in that hospital bed, but his eyes were determined. Vera sat beside him, perfectly composed, already taking notes on her phone about treatment schedules and logistics. "The doctors say chemotherapy could give us 18 months, maybe 2 years if we're lucky," Dennis explained, his business mind already working through scenarios. "I've arranged for Tom to handle day-to-day operations at TechFlow." Dr. Peterson outlined the treatment plan: aggressive chemotherapy every 3 weeks, possible surgery if the tumors responded, radiation therapy to manage pain. Dennis listened like he was planning a product launch, asking detailed questions about success rates and side effects. "I'll drive you to treatments," I'd said immediately. Vera looked up from her phone. "Actually, Horace, I can handle his medical appointments. You don't need to worry about that." But within 3 months, her tune had changed completely. By March 2024, Dennis was halfway through his chemotherapy regimen, and the treatments were brutal. He'd lost 30 pounds and most of his hair, but he still insisted on attending important business meetings. I'd been driving him to every appointment because Vera had started finding excuses. "I can't watch this anymore," she'd told me one afternoon while Dennis slept off his latest chemo session. "You're better at taking care of him anyway. He needs someone stronger right now." Stronger, as if loving my son through his illness was some kind of burden instead of a privilege. By summer, I'd moved into their guest room. Dennis needed help with basic tasks, cooking meals he could keep down, managing his medications, getting to and from treatments when he was too weak to drive. Vera had retreated to her office, claiming she was managing the emotional stress by staying busy. The truth was simpler. She was planning her exit. I'd catch her on phone calls with real estate agents, discussing property values and market timing. She'd researched divorce attorneys, though she never filed papers. Why bother when cancer was going to solve her problem more efficiently? "How much longer is this going to take?" she'd asked me one evening in October while Dennis was upstairs resting. "I have plans to make, Horace. I can't put my life on hold indefinitely." I'd stared at her, speechless. My son was fighting for his life, and she was irritated by the inconvenience. But Dennis saw more than I'd realized. During his final month, when the treatments had stopped working and hospice care began, he'd made mysterious appointments with Leonard Baxter, his family attorney. They'd meet in Dennis's home office for hours, going over documents I wasn't allowed to see. "Dad, I've taken care of your future," he told me during one of our last real conversations. His voice was weak, but his eyes were sharp with purpose. "Trust Leonard. He'll explain everything after I'm gone. Dennis, you don't need to worry about me. Just focus on getting better." "I'm not getting better." His honesty was brutal and clean, like everything else about him. "But I've made sure Vera can't hurt you, or anyone else who mattered to me." I hadn't understood what he meant then. Sitting beside his grave now, watching the groundskeepers approach with their shovels, I was beginning to suspect my son had been planning one final project, the most important one of his life. The wind was getting stronger, and the last of the mourners had disappeared. Martha had retreated to her car, giving me space to grieve privately. Soon, I'd have to leave Dennis here in the cold ground and return to a world where Vera believed she'd won everything. But something in my son's final words suggested the game wasn't over yet. Footsteps crunched across the cemetery gravel behind me. I turned to see Tom Riley approaching with Martha and 2 other colleagues, their faces somber with genuine grief. These were people who had actually cared about Dennis. Unlike the woman standing 15 feet away, still checking her phone. Horace, Tom extended his hand, his grip firm and warm. Dennis was brilliant. His company changed the entire industry. The way he revolutionized project management software, we'll never see another mind like his. Before I could respond, Vera's voice cut through the cold air like glass. Yes. And now that brilliance will finally pay off. She looked up from her screen with a satisfied smile. All those years of hard work are about to benefit the right people. Tom's face went pale. Martha stepped closer to me, her motherly instinct sensing danger. The other colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. Vera, I said quietly. These people are here to honor Dennis. Oh, I'm honoring him. She slipped her phone into her purse with deliberate slowness. By making sure his success isn't wasted on sentiment. Dr. Sarah Chin, one of Dennis's lead developers, cleared her throat awkwardly. We should probably head back to the office. There are projects to discuss. Actually, Vera said, her voice rising with false cheerfulness. There won't be any projects for a while. I'll be reorganizing everything once the legal formalities are complete. Tom's jaw tightened. Vera, Dennis built that company with specific goals. His team knows how to. His team works for me now. She checked her expensive watch, the one Dennis had bought for their anniversary. Everything works for me now. Martha discreetly pressed a small piece of paper into my palm. Her phone number written in careful script. If you need anything, she whispered. You can always call. I nodded gratefully, tucking the paper into my coat pocket. At least someone in this world still understood basic human decency. The remaining guests began their awkward departures, murmuring quick condolences before hurrying toward the parking area. Mrs. Henderson shook her head as she passed Vera, disapproval written across her weathered features. The young pastor who'd conducted the service looked like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it. Within 10 minutes, only Vera and I remained beside Dennis's grave. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, and my breath came out in small white puffs. She seemed immune to the cold, energized by some internal fire I was only beginning to understand. Horace. Her tone shifted, becoming businesslike and sharp. We need to discuss housing arrangements. Something ice-cold settled in my stomach. What do you mean? I mean your living situation. She pulled out her car keys, jingling them impatiently. We'll handle this at the house. There are documents you need to see. The way she said documents made my engineering mind start calculating probabilities. None of them good. Dennis had been so careful about everything else. Had he somehow missed protecting me from his own wife? Vera, I've lived in that house for 18 months since Dennis got sick. Yes. Her smile was sharp as a winter wind. And now Dennis is gone. She turned and walked toward her silver Mercedes, her heels clicking against the concrete with mechanical precision. I watched her confident stride. The way she moved like someone who'd already won a game I didn't know we were playing. Standing alone beside my son's grave, I felt the first real fear I'd experienced since his diagnosis. Dennis had warned me to trust Leonard, but Leonard wasn't here. The only person who might have answers was walking away from me toward a car that cost more than my annual pension. I looked down at Dennis's photograph one more time, then folded the funeral program carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket beside Martha's phone number. Whatever Vera had planned, I was about to find out. The 15-minute drive to Evanston passed in suffocating silence. Vera drove with the radio off, her manicured fingers tapping against the steering wheel in rhythm with some internal countdown. I watched familiar Chicago suburbs roll past the passenger window, each landmark reminding me of drives I'd taken with Dennis over the years. When we turned into the circular driveway of the Grant family mansion, my headlights caught something that made my breath stop. 3 large suitcases sitting on the front steps like abandoned luggage. What are those? I asked, though my stomach already knew the answer. Vera parked with deliberate precision and turned off the engine. Your belongings are by the door. This house is mine now. I stared at the suitcases, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Vera, this is illegal. I'm officially registered here. This is my address on all my documents. She stepped out of the car and walked to the front door with confident strides, pulling out her house keys. Read the rental agreement, Horace. Dennis rented you a room. The lease ended with his death. Rental agreement? I followed her up the brick steps, my legs feeling weak. What rental agreement? Instead of unlocking the door, she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were 3 pages of legal documents, neatly typed and bearing Dennis's signature from 12 months ago. Room rental agreement, she read aloud, her voice crisp with satisfaction. Month-to-month tenancy between landlord Dennis Grant and tenant Horace Grant. Automatic termination upon death of landlord. My hands shook as I examined the papers under the porch light. Dennis's signature looked authentic. The dates were correct. The legal language was precise and binding. We just buried your husband, I said, my voice cracking with disbelief. And now my new life begins. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking my entry to the house where I had cared for my dying son. Without you, Dennis would never have wanted this. He loved me. He wanted me taken care of. Dennis is dead. Her voice was flat, emotionless. I'm alive, and this property belongs to me. The deed is in my name as surviving spouse. I looked past her into the warm-lighted hallway where Dennis and I had shared so many conversations during his illness. The workshop he'd built for me was visible through the kitchen window. $10,000 worth of tools and equipment I'd barely had time to use. My tools. My workshop. Your workshop is on my property. You can arrange to have everything moved once you find somewhere to live. Where am I supposed to go? It's nearly 7 o'clock on the day of my son's funeral. That's not my problem. She stepped aside just enough to grab the front door handle. Your belongings are packed. Your rental period has expired. If you're not gone in 15 minutes, I'll call the police for trespassing. The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This woman had eaten dinner at my table, had accepted my care during Dennis's illness, had smiled and played the devoted wife while planning this exact moment. I walked down to my old Honda Civic and began loading the suitcases into the trunk and back seat. Everything I owned now fit in 3 bags: clothes, a few books, Dennis's photographs, and the small box of model airplanes we'd built together when he was young. Vera watched from the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the house that was no longer my home. She didn't move to help. She didn't speak. She simply waited for me to finish and leave. As I closed the car trunk, she called out one final statement. Don't come back without an appointment, Horace. This is private property now. The door closed with a solid click, followed by the sound of deadbolts turning. Lights began switching off in the house, room by room, as if she was erasing my presence from every space I'd occupied. I sat in my car for a moment, engine running, heat blowing against my face. Through the window, I could see the workshop Dennis had built, the tools glinting in the darkness. 18 months of my life had been spent in that house, caring for my son, watching him fight and fail and die with dignity. Now I was homeless on the day of his funeral. The radio played soft jazz as I drove away from Evanston, following signs toward Chicago's cheaper motels. In my rearview mirror, the Grant mansion grew smaller until it disappeared entirely, taking with it the last physical connection to my son's life. But Vera had made one mistake. She'd shown her hand too early. Dennis had been planning something with Leonard Baxter, and tomorrow, I was going to find out what. The flickering neon sign reading "vacancy at the Midwest" Inn looked like a lifeline in the growing darkness. I'd spent 2 hours driving through Chicago's outer suburbs, comparing rates and establishments that grew progressively shabbier as my options narrowed. $65 per night was manageable for a few days, though my modest savings wouldn't stretch much further. The desk clerk barely looked up from his magazine when I signed the register. Room 127 was at the far end of the parking lot, wedged between a noisy ice machine and a stairwell that smelled of cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. Inside, the room felt like stepping backward in time: faded floral bedspread, wood-grain furniture from the 1980s, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. The contrast with the mansion I'd called home just hours ago would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. I unpacked methodically, hanging my funeral suit in the narrow closet and arranging my few belongings on the small table by the window. The rental agreement documents lay spread across the scratched surface like evidence in a crime scene. Under the harsh overhead light, Dennis's signature looked even more authentic, more damning. Outside, highway traffic hummed steadily past the motel, punctuated by the occasional truck downshifting or motorcycle roaring toward the city. The sound was oddly comforting, proof that the world kept moving even when your own life had just derailed. I found Leonard Baxter's business card in my wallet, behind a photo of Dennis at his college graduation. The card was slightly bent from years of carrying, but the phone number was still legible. An old rotary phone sat on the nightstand, another relic from decades past that somehow felt appropriate for my current situation. Leonard answered on the third ring, his voice professionally warm despite the late hour. Baxter and Associates, Leonard speaking. Leonard, this is Horace Grant. I apologize for calling so late, but I need legal consultation. Horace. His tone shifted immediately to genuine concern. My deepest condolences about Dennis. He was an extraordinary young man. What happened? I explained the eviction, the rental agreement, and Vera's calculated timing. Leonard listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement that told me he was taking careful notes. Is this legal? I asked when I'd finished. Can she really throw me out on the day of the funeral? Unfortunately, if the rental agreement is valid, she has the legal right to terminate tenancy upon the landlord's death. Illinois law is quite specific about month-to-month arrangements. He paused, and I could hear papers rustling. However, there are other matters we need to discuss. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? What kind of matters? Dennis's will reading. There are provisions you should know about. Something in his voice made my pulse quicken. Provisions? I can't discuss details over the phone, but Dennis was very thorough in his planning, very thoughtful about the people he cared about. Another pause. Bring the rental agreement documents with you. I'll need to examine them carefully. We scheduled the appointment for 10 o'clock the next morning. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, looking out at the parking lot where my Honda sat, surrounded by pickup trucks and aging sedans. A family was unloading suitcases 2 doors down, father, mother, and 2 young children who seemed excited about their motel adventure. I thought about Dennis's final words. Trust Leonard, he'll explain everything. At the time, I'd assumed he was talking about funeral arrangements or simple estate matters. But something in Leonard's voice suggested my son had been planning more than I'd realized. The photograph of Dennis at graduation smiled at me from the nightstand. 22 years old, full of dreams and determination, standing beside me in his cap and gown. He'd whispered something to me that day, "Dad, someday I'm going to take care of you the way you've taken care of me." Maybe he'd found a way to keep that promise, even from beyond the grave. I turned off the harsh overhead light and settled back against the thin pillows. Through the walls, I could hear a television playing sitcom laugh tracks and the distant sound of the family next door settling in for the night. Tomorrow, I would learn what Dennis had really been planning during those mysterious meetings with Leonard. Tonight, I would try to get some sleep and prepare for whatever revelation awaited me in the morning. For days at the Midwest Inn had taught me the rhythm of desperation. Wake at dawn to highway noise. Shower in a stall barely wide enough for my shoulders. Instant coffee and stale donuts from the vending machine. Count the diminishing bills in my wallet and calculate how many more nights I could afford. March 20th arrived, gray and cold, but it felt different. Today held answers. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the navy one Dennis had insisted I buy for his wedding 7 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. In the cracked motel mirror, I looked like what I was, a 65-year-old man trying to maintain dignity while living in a $65 a night room. The drive downtown took 45 minutes through morning traffic. Chicago's skyline emerged gradually, glass towers reaching toward overcast clouds that promised snow. I'd driven these streets countless times during my engineering career, but today felt like entering foreign territory. Baxter and Associates occupied the 28th floor of a gleaming office building in the Loop. The elevator ride gave me time to steady my nerves and review the questions I'd prepared. Leonard had been cryptic during our phone conversation, mentioning surprises and provisions without specifics. The reception area whispered expensive legal services, mahogany furniture, original artwork, and a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more per month than my pension. The receptionist, a professional woman in her 30s, smiled warmly when I announced myself. Mr. Grant. Mr. Baxter is expecting you. Conference Room B. Leonard rose from behind a table covered with legal documents when I entered. He was younger than I had expected, maybe 55, with graying temples and the confident handshake of someone accustomed to handling other people's crises. Horace, thank you for coming. His voice carried genuine warmth beneath the professional tone. Please sit. Coffee? Thank you. I settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Leonard, I need to understand my situation. Vera has made it clear she considers me an obstacle to be removed. He poured coffee from a silver service, his movements deliberate and calming. Dennis left a very detailed will. There will be surprises. What surprises? Vera says everything belongs to her as the surviving spouse. Dennis anticipated various scenarios. Leonard's smile was slight but encouraging. Trust the process, Horace. Your son was extraordinarily thorough. I pulled out the rental agreement documents Vera had produced. What about this? Can she really evict me based on Dennis being my landlord? Leonard examined the papers carefully, his expression revealing nothing. The rental agreement appears legitimate. However, inheritance law is complex. There are protections for family members that supersede simple landlord-tenant relationships. What about the house? Can I return? Stay at the motel for now. His tone was firm but reassuring. Everything will become clear very soon. I've scheduled the formal will reading for this Friday at 2 o'clock. All parties will be present. All parties? You, Vera, and any witnesses Dennis specified. Tom Riley from the company, Martha Ellis as a family representative. He made notes on a legal pad. The reading will be recorded for legal purposes. Relief mixed with anxiety in my chest. Leonard, I appreciate your help, but I need to ask about your fees. My resources are limited. Dennis arranged for all legal expenses related to his estate. You don't need to worry about costs. Leonard's smile broadened slightly. Your son thought of everything, Horace. Absolutely everything. Something in his tone suggested layers of meaning I couldn't yet grasp. Dennis had always been a planner, but the precision of these arrangements felt almost supernatural. Will Vera bring her own attorney? I expect so. She's entitled to legal representation during estate proceedings. Leonard gathered the documents into neat stacks. Horace, I want you to understand something important. Dennis loved you deeply. Every provision in his will reflects that love. The words hit harder than I'd expected. for days of anger and desperation had temporarily masked my grief. But Leonard's quiet certainty brought it rushing back. My son had been protecting me even while fighting cancer, even while his wife was planning my destruction. Friday at 2 o'clock, Leonard confirmed, handing me an appointment card. 28th floor, Conference Room A, bring identification and any documents you think might be relevant. I stood to leave, feeling steadier than I had since the funeral. Leonard, can you give me any hint about what Dennis planned? Trust your son's judgment. His handshake was firm and final. He knew exactly what he was doing. The elevator ride down felt different from the ride up. Instead of desperation, I carried cautious hope. Dennis had been 3 moves ahead of everyone during his illness, apparently including his wife. Driving back to the motel through afternoon traffic, I thought about Friday's confrontation. Vera would arrive expecting complete victory, probably with expensive legal representation. She'd spent 4 days planning her next moves, confident in her position. But Dennis had been planning much longer. Friday morning arrived with a kind of bitter wind that makes March feel like winter's final assault. I'd spent the previous 3 days at the motel in a strange state of suspended animation. Too anxious to read, too restless to sleep properly, too broke to do anything but wait. By 11 o'clock, I was dressed in my funeral suit again, checking my appearance in the motel's unforgiving mirror. The face looking back showed every one of my 65 years, plus the weight of the past weeks. But my eyes held something they hadn't since Dennis's diagnosis: purpose. The drive downtown felt different this time. Instead of desperation driving me toward Leonard's office, I was moving toward answers. Whatever Dennis had planned today would reveal his final project, and I suspected it would be his masterpiece. I arrived at Baxter & Associates 15 minutes early, partly from anxiety and partly from respect for the solemnity of the occasion. The same receptionist greeted me with professional sympathy, directing me to Conference Room A, a larger room than where Leonard and I had met, with a breathtaking view of the entire downtown area. Leonard was already there, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and what appeared to be audio recording equipment. His manner was calm but alert, like a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Horace, right on time. He gestured to a chair across from the head of the table. The others should arrive shortly. Others turned out to be a parade of people whose reactions would define the afternoon. Tom Riley arrived first, looking uncomfortable in a suit that suggested he'd rather be debugging code than attending legal proceedings. Martha Ellis followed, carrying a small purse and wearing the expression of someone prepared for family drama. Then came Vera. She swept into the conference room like a woman attending her coronation, dressed in an expensive black suit that managed to look both appropriately somber and triumphantly elegant. Behind her walked a sharp-faced woman in her 40s, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed high-end legal representation. Margaret Walsh, the woman, introduced herself with a crisp handshake. "I'm representing Mrs. Grant's interests during these proceedings." Vera settled into her chair with the satisfaction of someone who'd already won. She barely acknowledged my presence, instead focusing on the legal documents spread across Leonard's end of the table. Her smile was small but unmistakable. "Horace, why did you even come?" "There's nothing here for you." The words were delivered with casual cruelty, loud enough for everyone to hear. Margaret Walsh put a restraining hand on her client's arm, but the damage was done. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Martha's face hardened with disapproval. "I'm here by legal right, as Dennis's father," I replied quietly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Legal right to what?" "You've been living in my house as a tenant." "That arrangement ended with my husband's death." Vera's voice carried absolute certainty. "Margaret has reviewed all the documentation. Everything belongs to me as the surviving spouse." Leonard cleared his throat, commanding attention with professional authority. "Please, everyone, calm down. Dennis's will is very specific about all distributions. Let's proceed with proper formality." Margaret Walsh opened her briefcase, extracting legal pads and what appeared to be prepared challenges. My client expects to receive the entire inheritance as the legal wife. We're prepared to contest any irregular provisions. Noted, Leonard said simply. He activated the recording equipment with a soft click. This is the formal reading of the last will and testament of Dennis Michael Grant, dated December 15, 2024. Present are Horace Grant, father, Vera Grant, surviving spouse, Margaret Walsh, attorney for Mrs. Grant, Tom Riley and Martha Ellis, designated witnesses. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of traffic 28 floors below. Vera leaned forward slightly, her posture radiating confidence. I gripped the arms of my chair, preparing for disappointment, but hoping for justice. Leonard opened the thick document, his voice taking on the formal cadence of legal proceedings. I, Dennis Michael Grant, being of sound mind and body, do hereby establish this as my final will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. The preliminary language washed over me like background noise. My engineering mind was focused on the substance that would determine whether I'd spend my remaining years in a motel room or something resembling home. Vera's fingers drummed silently against the conference table, heaping time with her internal countdown to victory. But Leonard's slight smile suggested the afternoon held surprises none of us were expecting. Now we come to the specific bequests and distributions, Leonard announced, turning to the document's crucial pages. The moment of truth had arrived. To my beloved wife, Vera Grant, Leonard's voice carried across the silent conference room with measured precision, I leave the following assets: the family residence at 1247, Maple Grove Drive, Evanston, Illinois, including all furnishings and personal property contained therein. All vehicles currently registered in my name, including the 2024 Mercedes S-Class and 2023 Tesla Model X. The checking and savings accounts at First National Bank of Chicago, totaling approximately $340,000. Vera's smile bloomed like poison flowers. She leaned back in her chair with visible satisfaction, casting a triumphant glance in my direction. See, Horace, I told you you'd get nothing. Margaret Walsh was taking careful notes, but her expression suggested routine satisfaction rather than surprise. Tom Riley stared at his hands, probably calculating the business implications of Vera's inheritance. Martha Ellis watched me with concern, clearly expecting devastation. Leonard continued reading without acknowledging Vera's interruption. Additionally, Mrs. Grant receives all jewelry, artwork, and collectibles purchased during our marriage, valued at approximately $85,000. Leonard, Vera said with false sweetness. I think we've covered everything important. Horace can see that Dennis was very clear about his intentions. Actually, Leonard replied calmly. We've only covered the preliminary distributions. There are additional bequests. He turned the page with deliberate slowness. To my father, Horace Grant, who sacrificed 18 months of his retirement to care for me during my illness, my heart stopped. Dennis had remembered. Even while dying, he'd protected me. I leave 50% ownership of TechFlow Solutions, including all shares, voting rights, and dividend distributions. This represents approximately $35 million in current market valuation. The silence that followed was deafening. Vera's face drained of color as if someone had opened a valve. Margaret Walsh's pen froze halfway through a note. Tom Riley's head snapped up with shock and something that looked like relief. What? Vera's voice cracked like breaking glass. That's impossible. I'm his wife. Everything should belong to me. Leonard continued reading as if she hadn't spoken. Additionally, Mr. Horace Grant receives the workshop and all tools constructed for his use, to be relocated to property of his choosing. All model aircraft collections built together during Dennis's childhood. And the sum of $150,000 from the Memorial Education Fund. I couldn't breathe. 50% of Dennis's company, $35 million, the workshop he'd built for my retirement. After a week of homelessness and desperation, my son had given me security beyond anything I'd dreamed. This is fraud. Vera shot to her feet, her carefully composed facade shattering completely. I'll challenge this decision. You orchestrated this, you scheming old man. Vera, I managed to say through my shock. This is legal. Dennis had the right to distribute his assets however he chose. Legal? Her laugh was sharp and bitter. You think I'll let you steal half of what belongs to me? Margaret, tell them this is contestable. Margaret Walsh was frantically reviewing her notes, clearly recalculating her entire strategy. There may be grounds for undue influence claims, but nothing. Vera's voice rose to near shouting. Dennis was sick, dying. His judgment was compromised. This old man took advantage of his condition. Tom Riley finally spoke, his voice quiet, but firm. Vera, I was present during several of Dennis's business meetings right up until the end. His mind was completely clear. He knew exactly what he was doing. You're all conspirators. Vera whirled to face Leonard. How much did Horace pay you to write this fiction? Leonard's voice remained professionally calm despite her accusations. Mrs. Grant, I understand your disappointment, but these distributions were entirely Dennis's decision. He spent considerable time ensuring every detail was legally sound. Vera turned back to me, her eyes blazing with a fury that made her previous cruelty look mild by comparison. You think you've won something, old man? I'll take everything from you. Every penny, every share, every tool in that workshop. By the time my lawyers finish, you'll be living in that motel for the rest of your miserable life. Martha Ellis reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. Dennis loved you very much, she whispered. But Leonard was organizing his papers with the careful attention of someone whose work wasn't finished. Mrs. Grant, please sit down. We haven't completed the reading. What else could there possibly be? Vera remained standing, her hands planted on the conference table like weapons. Leonard's smile was slight but unmistakable. There is one more condition that affects all previous distributions. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Whatever bombshell Dennis had prepared, Leonard was about to detonate it. Leonard's slight smile deepened as he reached for another document from his carefully organized stack. The conference room fell silent except for the soft hum of recording equipment and Vera's labored breathing as she processed the devastating news about the shared inheritance. There is one more clause in the will, Leonard announced, his voice carrying the weight of a final revelation. A special condition that Dennis added 3 weeks before his death. Vera's eyes narrowed dangerously. What condition? You're hiding something. The condition states, Leonard read with measured precision, that if my wife, Vera, attempts to force my father, Horace, to leave our family home within 1 year of my death, the entire inheritance, including house, vehicles, bank accounts, and business shares, automatically transfers in full to Horace Grant. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the traffic noise from 28 floors below seemed to stop. Vera's face drained of color as the implications crashed over her like a collapsing building. No. Her voice cracked with desperate disbelief. This is a trap. He couldn't have known. Dennis also left a video recording explaining his motives, Leonard continued, setting up a small screen. He wanted you to understand his reasoning. The monitor flickered to life, and Dennis's familiar face appeared, thinner than in health, but with eyes sharp with intelligence and love. My heart nearly stopped seeing my son again, hearing his voice from beyond death. Vera, if you're watching this, it means you've evicted my father from our home. Dennis's voice was gentle but firm. I hoped you would surprise me. I hoped the woman I married would show compassion during grief. But I know you too well. Vera was hyperventilating now, her hands gripping the conference table until her knuckles went white. Margaret Walsh was frantically taking notes, but her face showed professional alarm at her client's complete legal collapse. Dad, Dennis continued, looking directly into the camera with that engineer's precision I taught him. I'm sorry you had to experience her cruelty, but I've protected you. Everything I built, everything I earned, it's yours now. Use it well. Live comfortably. Honor Mom's memory in that house. The video paused, and Leonard's quiet voice filled the stunned silence. The eviction occurred on March 15th, the day of Dennis's funeral. The condition was immediately triggered. All assets transferred to Horace Grant. Effective immediately. This isn't legal. Vera's voice rose to near screaming. A will can't have conditions like this. Actually, it can, Leonard replied calmly. Conditional inheritance is perfectly legal in Illinois when the conditions are clearly stated and not against public policy. Dennis consulted extensively to ensure enforceability. Margaret Walsh finally found her voice. We'll challenge this immediately. Undue influence, mental incapacity, fraudulent, the video continues, Leonard interrupted, restarting the recording. Dennis smiled sadly from the screen. Vera, I loved you for 7 years. I gave you everything I could. But love without kindness is just possession. Dad raised me to treat people with dignity, especially family. I hoped marriage would teach you the same values. Vera made a choking sound and doubled over as if physically struck. If you had shown Dad even basic respect after my death, you would have inherited everything as my wife. But I knew your nature. I gambled on your greed overcoming your wisdom. Dennis's expression was sorrowful but resolved. I lost that bet, but Dad won his future. The video ended with Dennis saying quietly, I love you both, but I protect the people who love others more than themselves. Leonard turned off the screen and faced the devastated room. The legal transfer begins immediately. Mrs. Grant, you have 30 days to vacate the property. Vera's breathing became rapid and shallow. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward in her chair. Margaret Walsh caught her as she fainted, calling for medical assistance. As paramedics were summoned and Vera was revived with smelling salts, I sat motionless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of my son's love and foresight. He had known exactly who his wife was and exactly how she would behave. Even dying, he had protected me with surgical precision. Tom Riley broke the stunned silence. Dennis was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Martha Ellis reached over and squeezed my hand. He saved you, Horace. Even from the grave, he saved you. Vera was helped from the conference room by paramedics, Margaret Walsh following with defeated professionalism. As they disappeared into the hallway, Leonard began organizing documents for immediate legal transfer. I remained seated, staring at the blank video screen where my son's face had been. Dennis had given me everything, security, dignity, and the profound knowledge that his love would protect me forever. The game was over. Justice had been served by the most loving hand I'd ever known. The next 2 months became a masterclass in legal futility. Despite losing everything through her own actions, Vera threw herself into challenging Dennis's will with the desperation of someone drowning in consequences she'd created for herself. Margaret Walsh's law firm occupied an entire floor of a Michigan Avenue high-rise, their marble lobby decorated with awards for complex litigation. But all their expertise couldn't overcome one fundamental problem. Dennis had been smarter than everyone else in the room, including them. The conditional clause is discriminatory, Margaret argued during the first hearing on April 2nd. It penalizes my client for exercising her legal rights as a property owner. Judge Patricia Harrison, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and no patience for frivolous arguments, reviewed the documents with clinical precision. The testator had full legal right to establish inheritance conditions, counselor. Nothing in Illinois law prevents conditional bequests based on beneficiary behavior. I attended every hearing from the gallery, watching Vera's legal team exhaust every possible angle of attack: undue influence, mental incapacity, fraudulent documentation, discriminatory conditions. Each argument crumbled under Leonard's methodical defense and the video evidence of Dennis's clear reasoning. Mr. Grant, Leonard had explained during our preparation sessions, Dennis spent 3 months crafting language that would survive any legal challenge. He consulted estate planning specialists, constitutional lawyers, and behavioral psychologists. This will is bulletproof. The discovery phase revealed devastating evidence for Vera's case. Witnesses testified about her behavior at the funeral. Tom Riley described her increasing absence during Dennis's illness. Martha Ellis recounted years of observing Vera's materialistic priorities. Even Mrs. Henderson from the church provided testimony about inappropriate comments during the service. The deceased demonstrated clear mental capacity throughout his illness, testified Dr. Peterson, Dennis's oncologist. Mr. Grant continued making complex business decisions until weeks before his death. His cognitive function was never impaired. Vera's own testimony proved disastrous. Under oath, she couldn't deny evicting me on the funeral day. She couldn't explain her absence during Dennis's medical appointments. Most damaging, she admitted spending inheritance money on legal fees before the will was even probated. So, you accessed estate accounts immediately after your husband's death? Leonard asked during cross-examination. I had bills to pay. Vera snapped, her carefully coached composure cracking. The funeral expenses, legal consultations, including retainer fees for challenging the will you assumed would give you everything. Margaret Walsh's objection was sustained, but the damage was done. Vera had revealed exactly the attitude Dennis had predicted and protected against. By early May, even Margaret Walsh was advising settlement. Horace, this isn't over, Vera declared after another failed motion. I'll find another way to fight this. But her resources were depleting as quickly as her legal options. The expensive law firm required substantial retainers. Expert witnesses cost thousands per day. Meanwhile, Leonard's fees were covered by the estate, giving us unlimited legal firepower. The final hearing on May 15 lasted only 30 minutes. Judge Harrison had reached her decision based on overwhelming evidence of Dennis's mental capacity, the will's legal validity, and Vera's clear triggering of the conditional clause. The testator created a legal document expressing his clear intentions regarding asset distribution, Judge Harrison announced. The conditional inheritance clause was properly executed when the surviving spouse evicted the testator's father from the family residence. All challenges are denied. Costs are awarded against the petitioner. Vera's shoulders sagged as the gavel fell. 2 months of expensive legal warfare had ended exactly where Dennis's video had predicted, with her losing everything through her own choices. Leonard and I stood in the courthouse hallway afterward, watching Vera and Margaret Walsh disappear toward the elevators. She moved with the defeated posture of someone who had finally understood the price of cruelty. Your son was extraordinary, Leonard said quietly. In 30 years of estate law, I've never seen planning this thorough. Dennis always finished what he started, I replied, thinking of all the model airplanes we'd built together. All the projects he'd completed with engineering precision. This had been his final project, ensuring justice through love, protection through wisdom, and consequences through choice. Even death couldn't stop Dennis from taking care of the people who mattered to him. Justice had been served, not through revenge, but through the simple truth that actions have consequences, and love protects those who deserve protection. June 1st dawned clear and warm, the kind of Chicago morning that promises summer is finally coming. I stood on the front steps of the Grant mansion, holding the same keys Dennis had given me 18 months earlier when I'd moved in to care for him. This time, though, I wasn't a guest or a tenant. I was home. The lock turned smoothly, and the front door opened onto the hallway where Vera had stood blocking my entry just 2.5 months ago. Now the house felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because love and justice had reclaimed it from greed and cruelty. Vera had moved out the previous week with surprising dignity. Our final conversation had been brief but civil. You won, Horace, she'd said while packing her jewelry box. But Dennis won't come back. You're right, I'd replied. But his love and wisdom live on. She'd nodded slowly, perhaps finally understanding that this hadn't been about winning or losing, but about consequences and character. I'd even helped her carry suitcases to her car, because Dennis had raised me to treat people with dignity, regardless of how they'd treated me. The house felt peaceful now, filled with memories of Dennis's childhood and achievements rather than the tension of his final months. I'd kept his home office exactly as he'd left it, and that's where I was sitting when Tom Riley called to discuss our first official business meeting. "Horace, I know you never planned to run a technology company," Tom said over the phone, but Dennis left detailed strategic plans for the next 5 years. "With your oversight and my operations management, we can build something worthy of his vision." "What did you have in mind?" "Expansion into educational software." Dennis believed technology should help people learn and grow, not just organize their schedules. "We could create learning platforms for engineering students, maybe partner with Northwestern University." The conversation continued for an hour, covering growth projections, hiring plans, and Dennis's notes about corporate social responsibility. My son had built more than a business. He'd created a platform for positive change. As the majority owner, I could ensure that platforms served purposes beyond profit. "Tom, I want to establish something else," I said as our call concluded. "The Dennis Grant Memorial Scholarship Fund. Full rides for engineering students from working-class families. Kids who have the brains but not the bank accounts. Dennis would love that idea." After hanging up, I walked through the house, reacquainting myself with rooms that held decades of family history. In the workshop Dennis had built for my retirement, I found a half-finished model airplane, a P-51 Mustang we'd started together during one of his better days. I sat at the workbench and picked up the tiny brushes, painting the wings the same bright purple Dennis had chosen for his childhood planes. Martha Ellis visited that evening, bringing a casserole and the kind of practical comfort that family provides during transitions. "How are you adjusting to all this?" she asked, settling into Dennis's favorite chair with a cup of tea. "It's overwhelming sometimes," I admitted. "The money, the business, the responsibility, but I keep hearing Dennis's voice telling me to use it well." "He planned everything perfectly, didn't he?" "Better than perfect. He knew Vera would reveal her true nature, and he protected me from it. Even dying, he was taking care of his old dad." Martha smiled sadly. "That boy loved you more than his own life." Later that night, I sat in Dennis's office reviewing the scholarship fund paperwork Leonard had prepared. The program would provide full tuition, living expenses, and mentorship for 20 students per year. In 10 years, we'd have helped 200 bright kids achieve their dreams. The phone rang as I was closing the files. The caller ID showed Northwestern University. "Mr. Grant, this is Professor Sarah Chen. I wanted to personally thank you for establishing the Memorial Scholarship Fund. The first recipient is a young woman from the South Side whose father works 3 jobs to support the family. She reminds me so much of Dennis. Brilliant, determined, and focused on using engineering to help people." After the call ended, I sat quietly in the gathering dusk, looking at Dennis's photograph on the desk. At 22, he'd been full of dreams about changing the world through technology. Now, even after death, he was making those dreams possible for others. Outside, Evanston settled into evening quiet. The house felt alive with purpose rather than empty with grief. Dennis's love had created not just justice, but ongoing hope for the future. His cruelty had been transformed into opportunity for deserving young people. I picked up the tiny P-51 Mustang model and painted one more purple stripe across its wing. Some traditions were worth continuing. Some love was worth honoring. And some justice was worth the wait. Dennis had been right about everything, as usual. Love protects. Wisdom prevails. And sometimes, if you plan carefully enough, you can take care of the people you love even after you're gone. The old workshop hummed quietly around me as I worked, and I could almost hear my son's voice. "Asterisk looking good, Dad. But maybe try a little more purple on the tail section." Asterisk this whole ordeal, it taught me so much about human nature, about love, and about the incredible foresight of my son. It made me wonder, What would you have done in my place? If you've ever faced a moment where you thought you'd lost everything, only to find a hidden strength or a surprising turn of events, I want to hear your story. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.